Welcome to the next episode of the, as I'm calling it in the title, J plus R movie podcast, episode 5 to be exact. This is going to be part 1. Part 2 will be recorded and uploaded soon, but in part 1, we are going to be looking at Collateral Beauty, and I will be describing the plot this time. As you're listening to it, please keep in mind that this is the actual plot as well. I'm not making anything up. This is actually the story of the film that we are going to then discuss. Okay, so it's set in New York and it's centered on Will Smith, who plays the head of this like advertising company or something. And it's been 2 years since he's lost his daughter and he's still grieving about it. And he's grieving in a way that is making it clear to his employee friends, played by Edward Norton, Kate Winslet, and Michael Pena, that he's just not fit to run a company, essentially. So instead of doing anything other than what they do, what they decide to do is they decide to hire a private investigator to crack into Smith's mailbox because he's been writing letters to people. And they find out he's been writing letters not to people, but to death, love, and time, like concepts as if they were people. Then what they decide to do is after Edward Norton runs into like Keira Knightley and finds out that she is like part of this 3-person theatre troupe, decide basically like these group of friends, they all decide basically that what they are going to do is that in order to get Will Smith fired from his job, that they need to hire these actors to pretend to be Death, Love, and Time, and then film the footage, and then in like post or whatever, like remove the people playing Death, Love, and Time to make Smith look crazy. And I guess this is supposed to also kind of help him. Meanwhile, there's a subplot revolving around Smith seemingly trying to get over the loss of his daughter through his experiences with Naomi Harris, who plays this like head of this like grieving parents counseling group. But unfortunately, the way that storyline concludes is equally as dumb as the plot that I've just told you. This movie is, this movie really, really, really sucks.
Yeah, it's not executed the best. It's kind of, for me, I think its main problem is it's an extremely over dramatic film that you could tell is trying to have depth and meaning, but is almost at the same time, and is almost too literal about it, and it doesn't land emotionally particularly.
What I think personally is that the film does on occasion have a couple of moments that are kind of effective. It has a few moments, and sometimes that's just because the actors are really doing their best to try and carry this like garbage material that they are given, and sometimes they do actually make something good out of it. Like, to give you an example, like, even though all Will Smith really has to do in this film is just kind of look sad and cry in some scenes and be a bit angry in other scenes, he does actually convince. And the same kind of goes for a couple of the other actors, like Kate Winslet. All she really has to do is just be the one person in the group who on occasion says like, oh, this isn't right. But because she's Kate Winslet, she does sell it. But the problem is that none of them really ever distract like the bad core at the center of this film.
It's a film that tries with big ideas, but I think in the way it does it, and do you know what, I don't even find the concept uninteresting, to be honest. The execution of it, I didn't care from the start, and then I didn't care going forward. And to me, I think one thing that really does drag this film down, because I think it would have been perfectly fine without the Naomi Harris character's subplot. But
Okay.
I think that subplot just ruins the film. Not that it was
Okay.
great anyway, but it ruins it.
Up until the reveal, like, did you think that it was working at all?
Oh, up until the reveal, I was kind of into it. I was like, okay, cool. There's a bit of a a bit of a harder grief counsellor there who's really, really sensitive, but at the same time, kind of doesn't properly let him get away with stuff. I like that. And then it was like, it's the real end. It's like, oh, it was his fucking wife, and you can tell from the script because it's set up that way. But at the same time, you're kind of going, no, they wouldn't do that. Oh, fuck's sake. Just started talking about divorce, I was like, they're fucking married.
How I felt about it was that, like, compared to like the central story of the film, that this plot line would have, it probably would have made for a better film. Just like a small drama about a man and a woman both dealing with the loss of their like daughters or whatever, and like coming together and having like a romance or whatever. You know, yeah, I feel like that entire subplot could have made for a good film on its own. It's kind of a problem that it's not given more time to breathe, but I did appreciate it. But the problem is again, it is that final reveal because it's trying to be a drama, but it's also got this like very hacky sensibility of dramas where they try and go for like twists, where they try and add these twists.
It kind of makes the whole relationship not work because it can't work that way at all. The way that it works is you kind of expect to help him accept his daughter's death. Like, you understand that that's his purpose, but the way that they interact throughout the film does imply that they don't know each other, and there's no reason that he would not remember his wife, and he kind of asks her name, or she gives it anyway. Like, it just doesn't make it, like, because he hadn't fully disassociated from reality, although they're trying to imply that he did. He didn't, and that's not presented anywhere in the film until the very last second. Then it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
So
they're trying to imply, I guess, is that both of them like kind of chose to treat the other as like somebody that they didn't know, because they try and sort of tie this in through this like passing letter that was the Smith, the either Smith or Harris left for the other, that said like, if only we could be strangers again or something like that. And so for some reason these two, when meeting again, decided to at the same time do that. They decided to at the same time act like they didn't know each other. That's kind of what they were trying to hint at. You know, that's kind of the point, that like maybe I don't know, their former relationship, it ended so badly that they didn't want to like remember each other. You know, that they didn't want to remember their relationship.
true, it's just not how people work. Like,
I know, yeah.
you can't. Believe me, if you could intentionally forget people, I think a lot of people would have chosen to do that in their lives.
Or even just act like you've forgotten somebody. Even that's pretty hard. You know, it would be one thing if one of them were doing that. And not to mention, it also, it makes her character, the wife character, it makes her look a lot more unlikable, because you kind of realize that when Coward has been telling all of this stuff to her, that she never thought at any moment to just drop the charade. If I had like a girlfriend or something and I broke up with them, yeah, you know, like for similar reasons, for painful reasons, right? And then she came back to me and she was all like, you know, oh, I've been like seeing these people, I've been having these hallucinations, or even just like her still being broken. At a certain point, if even if I were to do this same charade, I would probably drop it once I found that stuff out, because I think that if you care about somebody, wouldn't you then want to help them, you know? But I didn't think that what she was doing was really helping him, because she could have easily at any point dropped the charade that she was doing and just said, "Oh my god, I'm gonna get you a doctor. You know, I'm gonna call somebody. I'm gonna I want to help you. You know, I know our relationship ended badly, but you know, I still love you and stuff. Or I still want to help you. You know, so it just takes the attempt at the relationship that they were going for and kind of makes it a lot more just dumb, but also very like, it just makes it feel kind of bitter. You know, that whole story.
It just felt inhuman. It didn't feel like a human thing at all. Or I couldn't understand how someone's mind could get there. That was my problem. I'm glad that the film doesn't villainize Edward Norton's character and I'm glad it doesn't villainize them, actually, because that's one thing I will give its credit, because they're making a very, very practical decision that kind of works without they're not like abandoning their friend. They're just realizing their friend can't run the business at this point, which is utterly fair after 2 years. I like there's an empathy to them, but they're also real people.
I think that if the film had gone with their motivation being to help him rather than to make him look crazy and to like get him fired, I think that if it were being done specifically to help him, then I think that story could have been a bit more justifiable.
Yeah, I think maybe I think the problem was, while in the real world, that you kind of look at that and you go, okay, yeah, that makes sense from a business perspective. That's why I like that they weren't villainized. But the point I was also going to make is, I don't see what the relevance of him being an advertising executive that couldn't work had to anything. It had relevance to Michael Pena's character, because obviously he didn't want to be out of money. He he needed money to pass on to his family before he died. And I get that, but part of me questions why you would write that in the first place. And yeah, I get it. Grief has devastating effect, and it can really, really push you hard. But there's no way it would be allowed to go on for 2 years. It just wouldn't. B, I don't. I think I do agree with you. I think if it hadn't on the business side of it at all, and it was just these three friends trying to help, I think it would have. Again, the film would have felt more human. I think that's the problem for me. It didn't feel quite human. And
so that's down to like the plotting as well, but it's also down to the like just the horrible dialogue in this film. It's that combination of being extremely sentimental and extremely it's because in the film, like, because okay, obviously because it's about subject matters like love, death, and time that they kind of try and analyze. You'd expect there to be like dialogue about like the nature of love or the nature of death and time or something, or like you'd expect that emotional, I guess, philosophical dialogue. But the dialogue in this film is just like it's just so it's trying so hard to be smart, but it's not good. And the problem is that most of the film is just dialogue. Most of the film is these characters having conversations with each other. So the dialogue really needed to work, but it just doesn't. I could quote several lines.
I think the one that hit me the hardest was it's the collateral beauty, and you're just like, fuck off.
When they say the title in the film.
They've done this kind of wink way and all of that, but it's still just, I don't know, for me, it wasn't what it should have been.
It should have been good, and it just wasn't to me or anything. Like, and it was
particularly well directed either.
So in terms of the direction, like it's not
awful, but it's not good.
Because it does look nice. It does have a very like nice look to it. It's set in a very like visually pleasing area. New York is a city that just kind of lends itself to like I wouldn't say visual beauty, but definitely to a visually pleasing environment.
It's an attractive place.
Yeah, I've been there. It is a nice place. But the issue with the direction, the direction very much accentuates this very emotionally manipulative tone, because there is an extreme overabundance of close-ups, an extreme overabundance of like shots where the face, and especially a lot of like head and shoulder shots, where it's just focusing on that, and a lot of shots of like the actors, looking teary-eyed or them like giving a monologue, and it's trying so hard. And and there are even other like just smaller things that I kind of noticed, like the abundance of scenes where characters walk into frame as well. It felt kind of like a trailer shot. A lot of the shot, like any shot where a character walks into frame, you just think to yourself like, oh, that's just there for the trailer.
The problem for me is the look didn't help the story at all. It
didn't.
Nice. And that's a problem. The film is not dealing with nice things. It should have been a lot more raw. Like, for example, Will Smith's apartment didn't have any furniture in it. The worst I can say for it. It didn't look like he was living in shambles. It didn't look like he'd kind of given up on himself a bit, which I think the film was trying to say that he'd done. If he was that non-functional, would he really... and I get that it affects people differently, but it just didn't make sense to me, the way that there was no... And I get that it was bare of anything that he'd enjoy as well, but it just seemed like it was a place that he worked, except we know he doesn't work. A couple of things that I think would have been really, really nice. For one, I don't think it should have used close-up so much, because the close-ups have lost their impact. I think maybe a slightly ethereal look would have worked, because if the whole point was that he's meant to be a bit disconnected from reality, show us that. And by that, I don't mean like those like CGI pink elephants floating around or anything like that. I mean, give the film some sort of distortion or a gloss or something in the scenes where he's not completely alone, so that you can show it he's not connecting to it in a way, even if it's subtle, like a tiny blurred vignette. Or I think the whole point of the film was kind of, it needed a perspective and it didn't have one. And what I would have done If you really wanted to explore the pain of grief, which is what I think the film is about, and the guy wanting to explore time and death and love, put it in his perspective and experience the
Mhm.
world like he does. Let him see it. Still
Yeah.
has so much fat that yeah, they're linked to love, death, and time. They're subplots, but you don't need it because the story itself is not focused.
On the one hand, the whole thing with like Howard and like the death of his daughter and whatever, that is technically the main storyline, but it's viewed from such an outside perspective. Again, aside from that subplot, that we don't really like get to explore it that much, and instead we're more focusing on the individual conflicts of his three friends.
For me, I don't understand who Howard is as a person.
I know,
Like he's
other
something.
than that he's sad.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's mad. He's sad. He's angry at the world. We get that. We could figure that out in about 3 minutes. For me,
Mhm,
there's not a depth to the character, and there could have been because he's there. Like what is your why? And then he doesn't have a why anymore, and he struggles to function. Boom. Like
mhm.
there's the setup is there, but it doesn't go anywhere. There's no like he doesn't rediscover a why. He doesn't really learn anything. He changes, but I don't know why he changes because he doesn't show something. Yeah, he does start to confront his grief, sure, but there's not an indication that he would. I think sometimes the film needs connecting scenes that it doesn't have because immediately after he gets visited by love, he goes to the therapy group. I've got no idea why he went inside. He never usually does, and all the conversation with love seemed to do was tick him off. Like it didn't seem to make him wistful or anything like that. Me would push him into that meeting. Anger wouldn't put him there.
It did kind of feel like we had like two different storylines that were playing at the same time but didn't quite link up with each other. And that is kind of a fundamental problem with the film, that all of these storylines are supposed to link, but they all feel very disconnected. Do the problems of the three friends matter at all to what's going on with Howard? Does what's going on with Howard matter at all to the three friends? I mean, they try and link it in at the end when you had that boardroom scene, which I want to talk about in a moment. But there's been that boardroom scene. Smith knows that they have problems, and he kind of just advises them on how to deal with them.
It's quite clear that he's not paying attention at work. Like it doesn't make sense that he would have picked up on those details.
The only indication, given that he knows about that Pena is dying, is just he says based on your history. But that's such a vague line that, like, it could be. It doesn't really explain anything. It's like,
Cool, I guess you know his medical history. I don't really know if he would have noticed because he doesn't seem to notice most of what's happening in his own business. And if he's
mhm.
that perceptive, surely he would
Yeah,
have seen this bit coming. But
yeah,
again,
yeah, yeah,
no
yeah.
indication he did that. And if he was that with it, then there's no way they would have been worried about it in the first place. There's no way he would have been able to hide that if he's meant to be the good person the film presents him as, or wants us to think he is anyway.
The way I kind of saw it was that maybe he kind of did know and was just ignoring it, and now after this, he's choosing not to. It could be that that's what they were trying to get across.
Well, that's great, but if you're doing that, you have to set that up, and that to me is the biggest problem with this film. They don't set things up.
Yeah, like a scene of them, I don't know, like going out for drinks together, and maybe like they kind of share some personal things with each other, so therefore
Sure,
that
you don't
Smith
even need to
knows
do
them
that.
well.
Just while he's in the office, through the window, have something sort of related happens, and have him look at it, register it, and then look away. That's about 8 seconds. I reckon you could do it in 8 seconds.
That also gets me on to another thing about this film as well, is that so what you're talking about like fixing that issue, I feel like the writer of this film, I do not know this for sure, I think that he was kind of aware of just all of the problems in this movie, because this film, it tries very, very hard to make a lot of excuses for itself in different ways. So I'll name all of them. So first of all, the film is aware, technically, in the characters bring up that it's wrong, how wrong it is to essentially get to gaslight, Howard into believing this stuff and get him fired, and convince other people into thinking that he's crazy. The film is aware of how unethical that is, because characters bring it up, but at the same time the film still goes along with it. There are a couple of scenes where like there's some sort of interaction, and a character will kind of point out the flaw in what they're doing. Like so to give you an example, there are two scenes with like Edward One of them is that one where he's speaking with like Love, the Keira Knightley character, and basically he says he has this like really really like sappy line about how when he held his daughter for the first time he had become love, but he prefaces that line by saying like, oh, I know that this is going to sound kind of goofy, and then there's the scene at the end between him and his daughter where he says like, oh no, I'm going to stay outside your school every day until you know, accept me, father. It was something like that, and the daughter was like, so you're going to stalk me then? Like the daughter brings that up, and I don't think the film quite refutes that necessarily. It just sort of brings it up, and then finally you have the reveal at the end that the three supposed actors actually were Death, Love, and Time, which feels like an attempt at sort of like not only having the storyline make more sense, but also having the actions of the characters be less immoral, because it feels like it's trying to say like, oh well, technically they weren't using real people; they actually were using Death, Love, and Time. You know, so if the writer of this film was aware of these flaws, then why didn't he like correct them in smart ways instead of correcting them like this or just acknowledging them?
Mate, if you notice the problems, don't make excuses for them. Fix them. If you don't fix them, your film is not ready. Don't release it. You know, don't put it out there to be made because you're not ready.
And you rarely get that with like some films. Like certain films, at the very least, you can say that they are sincere and earnest, even with their problems.
Yeah, yeah, and that I don't mind as much. Like, I'll quite happily watch. Do you know what? I'll be honest. I'll quite happily watch a bad film as long as it, you know, if it's not aware of it and I can tell it's sincere, I will quite happily sit down and watch it because that's great for me. You know, it just otherwise, you know, it just doesn't work so well.
It's distracting because as a viewer, you might feel this way, and then the film is kind of acknowledging that it understands that you feel this way, but it's not really correcting it. Like, especially in regards to that, you know, final twist, it feels like it's trying to sort of like give you a final twist that makes you go like, oh, that's smart. So you just think to yourself like, wait, that doesn't make sense. So how does that work? Like, what are the rules regarding like Death, Love, and Time? You'd be thinking like, why did Death, Love, and Time even need to be involved in this scheme to begin with? Like, couldn't they have just come up to Smith? How can they take human form? Like, do they have personalities? How do they pretend to blend in with humans? Do they blend in with humans? You know, you just have all these questions.
Yeah, and you kind of you know that some people must be able to see them at some points because they look at themselves. But is that the way that they describe themselves, or are they just actors, or is he just hallucinating at the end? I think because it isn't clear enough, it's not. And it's not unclear in the way of, oh, we could interpret that. It's unclear in the way of, I don't care.
Because it's right at the end of the film. It's like, imagine if, I don't know, like in the Sixth Sense, okay, the Sixth Sense does end with like, you know, the reveal obviously that he was a ghost.
They set that up throughout the film. You can tell it's weird.
If the Sixth Sense didn't have that element at all in it, and it was just about some crazy kid who was claiming that he saw ghosts, but in reality, like the film goes out of its way to show that he can't. But then at the end, it said, "Oh wait, actually, he can see ghosts."
There's a weird part because they get hired as actors, and the person who plays Love is rehearsing in like 6 different places. And yeah, that could have been a lie, I guess. But why show us? Why show them rehearsing at all in that many different things? And yes, other people don't really react to them, except like people that they know are in on it, I guess. But it's, you know, at the same time, like I don't get why they're doing that, or why they would take an interest in the friends at all. If they
Well,
want to go and see him, why not just go and see him? Because his problem has nothing with colleagues. Like, it has absolutely nothing to do with them.
at most, they're just the only people who noticed it or care enough to, I guess, do something about it. You know, that's kind of what we see, because they are really the only people that we see in the film. Like any other employee of Howard is just somebody in the background. So these guys don't even. I wouldn't even say they're employees. They're like his friends. And like, and what it also makes you wonder as well is like, so okay, if like, I don't know whether this could be considered a plot hole enough or not, because they do kind of try and explain it by saying that they can appear to anyone that they want to appear to. But even that's quite vague. Like, does that mean that they can only appear to certain people that they interact with, or can they appear to the general public? Do they only take form when people notice them? Or when people look in their general direction? Because if that's not the case, then I feel like Norton, Pena, and Winslet would also look crazy as well. If Death, Love, and Time can only be seen by them and not by people in the public, then they're going to look crazy as well, won't they?
Yeah, and someone would have at least given them like a look. But there's no hint that they're not real people until the end. Just kind of, well, okay then.
So there are two aspects that to me kind of made this film like really just aggravating. First of all, it was that general like kind of plot line, because the problem is that they kind of essentially, there are no repercussions for it at all. The most we really get is that like the Winslet character kind of confesses to it, which suggests that she feels bad about it. But aside from that, like there's no like fallout of any kind. Like Smith doesn't try and like sue them or fire them or punish them or anything. And although Smith like signs the papers like he's supposed to, there's no scene of anybody involved being like, I think we should get like a doctor for this guy, or even like, oh man, I think we should throw this guy into like an asylum or something. He's speaking to people who aren't there and stuff. It's like, so as a result, so the problem is that as a result of showing no consequences, it essentially endorses that kind of gaslighting storyline, which I found just really like.
It's quite problematic because on the one hand, I did say I like that I don't villainize them, but on the other hand, they also don't criticize the characters particularly either, which for me, like and I get films meant it can have an objective viewpoint and yada yada yada. I get all of that, but I think the fact that there's not any sort of judgment placed on any character is a problem because it presents any of the behaviour as either acceptable or not. And yes, films about interpretation, films about you should be able to decide for yourself what it is, but at the same time, like that, violations of trust like that.
They could have gotten like put in prison. If they, like, in the real world, if somebody tried to do that, then I'm sure you could, through some law, you could easily land them in jail or something. I think that would be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that the film is, well, and this is probably my biggest problem. The film is also, I will say that unlike certain other like bad films, whether they be dramas or like whatever genre they are, this film does kind of have a clear message, or at least an attempt at a message. Like the message of this film, what I feel it's supposed to be is it's supposed to be about moving on from grief, and so about like moving on from grief through honesty and like pulling yourself out of a situation. Like there's like all three of the subplots and the Howard plot line. It's all about like this character is not doing something and they need to do something and they end up doing it. Like Norton has to confess to his daughter that he loves her. Winslet has to start a family. Penny has to tell people that he's dying. Howard has to admit that his daughter is dead or something, or like admit it so therefore he can move on. But when you combined it with the main story of what this film about, it feels so like contradictory. It's like the film is about that, yet it's also about gaslighting and lying is a good thing. It's like, especially when you take that twist into account, because Death, Love, and Time, they never said like, they never confessed to the friends like, oh, we are Death, Love, and Time, so they were technically lying as well. And even the scheme that they were taking part in was again a kind of an elaborate like gaslighting ploy, and they attempt to kind of explain it at the end by having Smith like see them and know that they're kind of not real, which I think would probably lead to like a psychotic breakdown for him. But we'll just ignore that. You can't have it both ways. It's like either just say that gaslighting through this method is necessary, or say that it's necessary to be open and tell the truth. What do you think of like the messaging? Did you kind of get those?
The messages that I really got from the film was kind of gaslighting is okay if you do it for a good reason, which is problematic as hell for several reasons.
Yeah.
And it's okay to treat the people in your life like that they don't particularly matter.
It's okay. I guess it's okay to do so if you then don't do it at the end. If you then reverse it, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like this film wants to suggest like it's good to help people in grief and it wants to do all of that, but then and it's trying to grapple with the complexities of that. But in doing so, it not only doesn't, but it also kind of just makes a lot of the characters just seem horrible.
So we brought up the character issue with like Howard about how we don't really know that much about him, but that could really apply to every other character as well. Like every other character, big problem is that we don't really get to explore them. We don't really get to know them as people. All we really get are these very flowery conversations that are related either to this main plot or just related to their own personal problem. But the film is kind of confusing that for being deep and complex. That's especially a big problem with like I don't know Winslet and Pena's characters because all we really get out of Winslet is just several scenes of I guess at like adoption or something. It was something related to like adoption or starting a family or whatever. But with Pena, we don't even get that. All we get is just him kind of coughing a lot, and that signifies that he's dying. And he's having these conversations with like Helen Mirren, who's playing death. And then at the end, we get like the payoff for it, but it's with his wife, who we hadn't seen in the film up till that point. So it didn't really have much impact. I mean, the Edward Norton stuff is a bit better because we do have that scene in the beginning with his daughter, which establishes that she doesn't like him that much. But even then, we still don't really connect, and that's a problem with the film because it's supposed to be an emotional drama, but we never really connected with these people. You know, we never really, and that could also be a problem with the running time as well. Because I found because surprisingly, it was. I mean, I will say this about the film: it wasn't boring by any means. It wasn't like slow, but it was just too
No,
short, and it maybe had they at least expanded it 2 hours, 2 hours, 10 minutes, then maybe they could have delved into some of the characters a bit more to make them more than just like archetypes, because that's kind of what they felt like.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, archetypes would have worked for Love, Death, and Time, but no other
Mhm.
character in that film should have been an archetype. And they just kind of, well, they weren't archetypes. They were stereotypes of grieving sad man, business obsessed guy who's with a daughter. It was kind of just characters, stock characters we've kind of seen before, without much really pushed. And then a lot of their conflicts, again, they weren't set up. Like Michael Pena's, fair enough. I get why his wasn't set up, and I think his storyline probably landed the best. And I put that in out of all the characters. I think Michael Pena's storyline was the only one I actually cared about. The lady wanting children, that was not a thing until they decided it was. Just seems like a confirmation of gender roles more than it does a character
Yeah, I
trait.
agree.
They
I
didn't
agree.
set it up. The guy who's got to learn to love his daughter again. I mean, sorry, so kind of make more of an effort to repair that relationship with his daughter. Cool, that could have been thematically relevant, but it kind of just it wasn't given enough focus. So I didn't care. I didn't have any investment. I think that was my major problem. I didn't care about a single character in this film.
Hmm.
And to me, I
Yeah.
got bored. I got bored. I didn't care.
When I say that the film isn't boring, I don't necessarily mean that it like objectively is not boring. I'm just saying in terms of my experience. I mean, it's hard because boring is like a bit of an emotional reaction. It's hard to like literally call a film boring, but
Yeah, that's why I said I got bored. Not that the film itself was necessarily boring. Some people it's not. But
yeah, I would say
it,
I guess bland would be a better word to use.
yeah, it just didn't. For me, it didn't work emotionally. I didn't feel anything. It felt clinical when it should have felt emotional. Like the last scene, for instance, I knew that his daughter was Olivia about 40 minutes beforehand. So
Okay.
the second she'd said it, and he wouldn't, I was like, oh, I know where you're going. To me, not only was it obvious, again, it just underpinned how much the relationship didn't make sense.
I will admit, like that ending scene, even though the twist does kind of muddle with it, I will fully admit that that scene is probably the closest to a genuinely like kind of heart wrenching moment. Because, and I think that that is just because of Will Smith's like acting. Because I will admit that like
Yeah.
his acting in that scene is really good. Like is that like his crying is really like
To be fair,
spot
Will
on.
Smith's performance in this film is great, and I think it's one of the things that keeps you being able to watch it. Because Will Smith is just one of those actors that does lift whatever project, most projects that he's in. Have you seen the film £7?
No, I know about it, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that, where the concept could have worked but didn't. The film could have worked but didn't. But he kind of made you still able to watch it anyway. And I got some care for Howard because Will Smith's performance was so good. about a side character that had maybe 30 minutes of screen time compared to the
Yeah,
main character is a problem.
if I will give any credit to Will Smith as like as an actor, I'll give him credit for not like wanting to overshadow his co-stars, but at the same time though, only does he outact them. He's also probably the only character who isn't kind of a terrible person in a sense. I think he probably is the only character that you can kind of sympathize with, but but that is more just because like the emotional state that he's in and what he's gone through is almost universally relatable.
The, the, the setup was there to make you be able to connect to him well, and he did, and you did. But I think the problem is because the film didn't make any logical sense, you just couldn't keep the investment up.
There are two more things that I just want to touch on. So this might sound like a nitpick, but it does underpin like how horrible the writing is. The interaction that Smith has, or that Howard has with Death on the train, right? With a few changes, it's a monologue that could have been really, really good. Like it could have been
Yeah,
a very powerful monologue, but there's one problem with it, and he's quoting a whole bunch like everything to him that indicates the message about like accepting death, not hating death, accepting that death is a natural part of life. He quotes the "Do not go gentle into that good night" poem, the one by Dylan Thomas. Like so, he quotes that, but the thing is that that poem is not about accepting death. In fact, it is very, very specifically about disliking the idea of death. It's about like fighting against the idea of death. And what to make matters even worse, he quotes the rage against the dying of the light line, which
yeah,
is probably the and not everybody who reads that poem might get that it's about death. Right, it clearly must have known that this poem was about death, so he was incorporating it into the monologue, but he didn't realize that it didn't make sense. And really, it's the only reference of his that doesn't make sense. Like when he starts quoting like "row, row, row your boat" or whatever, like that, like okay, "row, row, row your boat" is not about death, but you can interpret it to be about death, just like how
yeah.
you can interpret it to be about any other issue. But that poem, the Dylan Thomas one, it doesn't make sense as part of that what he's talking about.
It doesn't tie in conceptually. It just doesn't work.
Final point I just want to make as well is about the film's symbolism as well. This ties into the other the big problem that I had about like contradiction, because so what they do with the film is, as a way of showing that Howard is grieving, basically show him making dominoes in his office, right? And it's pretty clear as soon as it happens what that's supposed to represent. It's supposed to represent that like grief has defeated him, he's stuck, and he's constantly doing that action over and over again as a sign that like he's in grief and can't get out of it. And at the end of the film, there is kind of a further confirmation of that symbolic meaning, because they basically show the video memory of him like of his daughter knocking over dominoes or something like that, or of him knocking over dominoes with his daughter, right? And that's good. It's a bit hokey, but whatever, it works just fine. But then they cut back to an image of the dominoes set up in his office, and then they just fall on their own. Out of context, it's extremely hokey and it's ham fisted as hell. But in context, it just muddles that point, because all of a sudden it takes what was supposed to be a theme about him not being able to move on and then kind of reappropriates it into being about him being able to move on, because the placement of that scene right after the bit where he finally like says the name of his daughter and admits like how his daughter died and him and his wife come back together, the placement of that feels so clearly like it's trying to say like, oh, he's now dealing with his grief, or he's now moving on with his grief. But that symbol, the symbol of the dominoes falling, has been used in the opposite way the entire time.
Sure, I have to say that is something about the film. It's got really confused symbolism, and I think that really hurts it.
Yeah, well, in that major instance, I didn't notice any other symbolism.
Well, just throughout. I mean, if you kind of think about it, like the way that they use most of their devices and plotlines are confused. Like what the characters are meant to signify gets confused. because obviously at one side, Edward Norton's character is at once the charming friend and ruthless businessman, except neither one is committed to, so neither one feels authentic. So you're just kind of there going, well, the character just does things, and that ruins their symbolic capability.
You could say the same for like a couple of the other characters as well. Like Winslet, she's all like, "This is bad," but she still goes along with it. Or I guess with like the wife, it's like it's like they build her up as one thing, and then they reveal that she's something else.
Perhaps they were more concerned about how it looks and how it worked. And don't get me wrong, how it looks is really, really important. That's not what I'm saying, but it has got to work a certain way. It's got to have a certain amount of setup, and you've got to be consistent with how you use your symbols, and you've got to be consistent with what your characters are at the very least, or your film doesn't work.
Overall, yeah, Collateral Beauty is like it's. I mean, I will admit it's more as a bad movie. It is more it is interesting, but it's not like a flavor of the week or anything. It's definitely like because in some areas it is definitely ambitious, but it is such a misfire, and it's such a. And again, it's got that added air of like pretension. It's got that added air of like attempting to be like emotional and smart, and it's just not. It's neither of those things. I could recommend a whole bunch of movies that are kind of like this before I would recommend this one. Like, all right, I'll recommend a few. Like, so watch like any version of like or any good version of A Christmas Carol, because that's kind of what this is. It's kind of like a
Yeah, yeah.
bad modern version of A Christmas Carol.
It is. It's tempting to be a Christmas Carol without quite getting why a Christmas Carol works.
I mean, obviously, it's not totally the same, but it's definitely it's got that same story about I guess you could call it cynical main character, cynical in different ways, but still cynical, like main character whose life is changed by the appearance of these three individuals who like kind of teach him things about himself, and then by the end he kind of regains the will to live, and it's even got the same setting as well, the same kind of Christmas setting. But the difference is that like in Christmas Carol in that story, like the message is very consistent and clear. It's totally coherent, and also it doesn't have a gaslighting story. There were a couple of other in 2016, a couple of other like grief films as well, like films that explored grief. Like there
Yeah,
was this one. There was this one that was really really good called Manchester by the Sea. Have you seen it?
I haven't, but I have heard of it.
Yeah, no, it's really excellent, and it's excellent because it deals with like the subject of grief in a very, very like extremely realistic way, and it has a very like non sappy core to it, but it's not a totally depressing film because it does have a sense of optimism despite its like kind of darkness. Third and final one I'd probably recommend over this is this other film that took like kind of a weird quasi fantasy approach to the subject of grief called like A Monster Calls, and that was like about it was the opposite. It was about a little kid dealing with like his dying mother. A monster comes to like visit him or something, and that film is kind of also about like dealing with like loss. It's more about impending loss, but it's about dealing with loss. But that film, like, it handles the whole like, is this real, is this not real, in a much more clever way. And the way that it ends, it kind of ends by giving you a bit of an answer, but you're still not totally sure. It does that kind of ending and reveal better than Collateral Beauty does.
The only way that I can sum up Collateral Beauty is good idea, terrible execution.
I agree.
Terrible might be a bit harsh, but poor execution.
Yeah, no. I think this movie is like total garbage. I wouldn't necessarily say that the idea of it was great. I mean, the theme, the story, like you needed to just pick one. And if you are going to go with the whole idea of like they're trying to get their boss fired just for work related reasons or something, or for purely selfish reasons, then make this like, I don't know, a dark comedy or a dark drama thriller or something. Make like embrace the fact that these people are not good people, but if you're a good movie, like try and find a way to make us like them despite them clearly being bad people. It's like that there are several different individual good films within this one shit film, I would say.
There's several films that could work, relationships that would be set up, but they all need time and focus that this film doesn't give them.
So that ends part one of this episode. The next part of it will be discussing Serenity, which will hopefully for me, be a much, much more entertaining discussion, and hopefully for Jack as well. Yeah, that's the end of part one.
All right,
Goodbye.
everybody.